Elise, what do you make of where these negotiations stand and of the rhetoric that we're hearing from President Trump? Will it matter if he meets with President Zelensky on the sidelines of the Pope's funeral?
I don't really think so, Kristen. I mean, you know, this is the first time that he will have met Zelensky since that awful February meeting where he kind of, you know, lectured him in the Oval Office and then canceled the press conference. And there's been a lot of talk since then. President Trump still hasn't gotten that deal on the rare earth minerals that he's waiting for because President Zelensky is waiting for some security guarantees from President Putin. And when you listen to what Steve Witkoff is telling Putin, it looks like the deal is still shaping up for Putin. They're saying, you know, Ukraine will never get Crimea. Not that anyone really thinks they would have either. They're never going to join NATO. Zelensky really can't sign on to a deal till he knows that he's getting something for Ukraine. So, and, you know, these conversations with Steve Witkoff and Putin, they're really secretive as opposed to what's going on with Zelensky, which is a little more transparent.
Yeah, it's a really great point. You know, when I talked to President Trump a couple of weeks ago, he said to me that if he didn't see the type of action from President Putin he wanted to see, that he would consider putting secondary tariffs on President Putin. Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican from Iowa, is urging the president to put sanctions on Russia, writing on X, "You ought to see from clear evidence that he is playing America as a patsy." Do you have any anticipation? Does your reporting tell you that President Trump is seriously considering imposing new sanctions?
I don't think that anything is in the offing eminently, let's say. But you did see yesterday when there was this horrible attack in Kyiv that President Trump went on his Truth Social and said, "Vladimir, stop it." He doesn't like, you know, it is true. He is playing Trump for a patsy. And President Trump doesn't like that. So he's making a lot of threats. And he's also, you know, he's getting frustrated. You've heard him. You've heard Secretary of State Marco Rubio. You know, President Trump could lose interest and move on. And then I'm really afraid what would happen for Ukraine then, because they're still on the back foot right now.
Yeah, we're going to have Marco Rubio exclusively on Meet the Press, we should say, since you mentioned him. Let's talk about the Pope. The president is there to mark his funeral, to attend his funeral, pay his respects. What was their relationship like, Elise?
Well, it was very frosty. And you remember during the first term, the Pope would put out statements, anybody that's building a wall, not building bridges, is sowing division, is not a Christian. And he never mentioned Trump per se, but you could kind of read between the lines. And he was very critical about, you know, climate change, not President Trump's policies, but efforts to deny climate change. He criticized the U.S. withdrawing under the Trump administration from the Paris Climate Agreement. And he was also, if you remember, the Pope was, you know, felt very strongly about migrants, refugees. And these are policies that, you know, President Trump was not forward-leaning in terms of, you know, advocacy for the poor, for things like that. And so I think it was frosty, and they had a very tense visit in 2017, if you remember.